The next topic is very sad for me, and I cannot not talk about it. So about a week ago, last Tuesday, the 28th of February, there was a tragic train collision that took place in Greece, and it cost the lives of 57 people. Now, it happened in northern Greece, but it could have happened anywhere. And such tragic train collisions have happened in Europe as well. Now, this tragic event has hit international news, and it has revealed the sad state of operation of the Greek railway system. Before we say more about this, you can visit our website and have a look at the premium podcast called The Rise and Fall and Rise of British Rail by John Wheatley. And for £5 a month, you can have access to all our premium content. Now, back to our topic. The disasters like these are occasions for mourning, but mourning is not enough. We must reflect upon what could have been done better, and we also must reflect about how to prevent such tragedies in the future. And if it is too idealistic to think that tragedies can be completely prevented, there is a significant question as to what we can do to lower the chances of them taking place. So, but also reflecting is not enough. Diagnosing a problem is half the solution. We need to act accordingly, and there needs to be implementation as well as diagnosis of the problem. Now, let us see what happened. I will make a short description of the event. Athens and Thessaloniki have two rail tracks: the northbound track that is used for trains that travel north, and the southbound one that is used for trains that travel south. Now, on Tuesday, the 28th of February, at around 7:20 p.m., a train left from Athens to Thessalonica. It had around 340 people and and more than 10 members of staff. Now, at some point, it halted due to a problem in the rails, and it was manually diverted into the southbound line. After a while, it was again diverted into the northbound line. At some point, it reached the Larissa station, and then something really tragic happened. The train stations and the operations there, they have some keys that they manually use to open the tracks that divert trains from one track to another. And it has been said that there was a faulty train descending, going south, and that it needed to be taken off course. And there was a switch key turned that diverted that faulty train away from the main lines. And then that key was left there. So at some point, the train driver asks the train station manager, should I go? Should I leave? And he says, yeah, you should leave. And they didn't turn the key. And they started and they entered instantly the southbound line. Now, as rumors say, there were systems in operation and there were red alerts and sounds that notified that trains are in a collision course because there was a freight train descending going south. No one heard this, apparently. And after 12 minutes, the trains collided. Four carriages were derailed. And the first one was literally burned because rumor has it that there were some explosives or some flammable materials in the freight train, and it was incinerated. There are some estimates that it reached 1,300 degrees Celsius there, and 57 people died. So the thing is that this has led to a really big discussion about who is to blame, but it should also bring forth a discussion about how to move from here forward. Now, I want to read an article from BBC, and then I will talk about the discourse, and then I will talk about what I think is something that Greeks should definitely bear in mind, and what everyone should bear in mind, because if you will see, there are many dangerous policies that were involved directly and indirectly in this event, and it is these policies that need to be counted. Now I'm reading from this article. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has asked for forgiveness from the families of the 57 victims of this week's train crash. In a Facebook message, Mr. Mitsotakis said that in Greece of 2013, two trains heading in different directions cannot run on the same line and no one notice. That's just for those who need to hear this. This is more of an ethical statement. It's not he did not just suddenly discover the nature of possibility. Protests have continued for days. Clashes with police were reported on Sunday as thousands joined the demonstration in the capital, Athens. Police estimated 12,000 people attended the protest. They said 7 officers were hurt and 5 arrests were made, the AFP news agency reports. Some demonstrators set fire to rubbish bins and threw petrol bombs. Police responded firing tear gas and stun grenades, clearing the central Syntagma Square of the protesters within a few minutes. The protesters also reportedly released hundreds of black balloons into the sky in memory of the dead, with some holding signs reading, "Down with killer governments." On the night of 28th of February, a passenger train and a freight train that were traveling in opposite directions ended up on the same track. The first 4 carriages of the passenger train were derailed, and the first 2 caught fire and were almost completely destroyed. The train crash has been widely attributed to human error. A 59-year-old station master in Larissa, who was charged with manslaughter by negligence, appeared in court on Sunday and has been taken into custody. His lawyer said the station master had admitted to having a share of responsibility in the accident. He faces between 10 years and life in jail if convicted. But many in Greece see the crash as an accident that had been waiting to happen, and the Railway Workers' Union blamed successive governments' disrespect towards Greek railways for leading to this tragic result. A government minister told the BBC that the lack of funding was the direct result of the strict terms of international bailouts imposed after the 2010 debt crisis. Union members were joined by residents of Athens and Thessaloniki and taken to the streets throughout the past week, shocked by the scale of disaster. The protests were also attended by many students. Several of the passengers on board one of the trains were students in their 20s, returning to Thessaloniki after a long weekend celebrating Greek Orthodox Lent. The rail network looked problematic with worn-down, badly paid staff. Nikos Sava, a medical student from Cyprus, told AFP agency. Train drivers in Greece have said there have been long-running problems with the electronic system that are supposed to warn them of danger ahead. The transport minister, Kostas Karamanlis, also resigned as a sign of respect for the people who had died. Mr. Karamanlis said he was taking responsibility for the government's failure to modernize the country's railways in the 3.5 years it had been in power. Immediately after the accident, the Greek government declared the 3 days of national mourning and said the cost of the victims' funerals would be paid for from the public purse. BBC Europe correspondent Nick Beek says the crash seems to be becoming a defining political issue for Greece as it prepares to face a general election in the spring. Media reports have given 9 April as a possible date of the elections, but analysts say that date may now be pushed back. Okay, so as we said, a 3-day period of national mourning was declared, and throughout this period and even now, and this will continue, there has been a significant attempt on various sides to engage in blame game. Now, to a degree, this is understandable, and of course, we need to find out who is to blame. But there are some dangers with this because it is a much more complex issue.
Can I ask, are the Greek railways in national ownership? Like, did the government run them?
So they were privatized around some years ago, but there has been there are rumors that say that the company behind who bought it, that appears as a private company, is linked with the Italian public sector.
Right. Okay.
Okay, but nevertheless, even if it's private or public, there need to be some standards that need to be operant, and there is both. I will claim that there is responsibility on both sides, and I will lay out the reasons why I think so. And I think that understanding them is key to moving forward. So the thing is that if we look at this complex situation, it is looking for a scapegoat will absolve another side from responsibility. And maybe not for this case here, but for other cases, this is going to be terribly unproductive, because the country needs to change, and it needs to change faster than it does change. And there are people who protest against these reforms. They are the direct and indirect beneficiaries of a system of political clientelism that is the dominant paradigm in Greece since the 80s. But there still need to be, but we need to focus on what each side is responsible for and know what to change. There are people who resist changes, but governments who have a reformist mandate, they need to push changes. And the people in general need to understand that when the beneficiaries of a particular system get upset because they think that they're going to lose their benefits, they will protest that the government is far right, to link that with our previous thing, or that their lives are not being respected, or that they are thrown away and that they are going to suffer. There are issues that need to be taken into account, especially when it comes to who gets positions of responsibility, especially when human lives are at stake. In the same way that we wouldn't want an air traffic controller to be someone who is underqualified and also is negligent to be the manager of the air traffic control industry. The same thing applies for trains. And I will say this: there have been people who go out in public and they say all sorts of things. Some of it is understandable, but there are other people who participate in this, and they don't see and they do not assume their own share of responsibility, not necessarily for this event, but for the entire structure that makes such tragedies more likely to happen. So the thing is that right now the government focuses on human error. And I think that there is human error here and there is criminal negligence. But I'm not a judge. I will leave that for the appointed judge. On the other hand, members of the railway union, I must say that they did warn that there were not some automated systems were not in place. So in that they're right. And the government should have been more apprehensive of that. And they should have taken that more seriously. This is where they do have responsibility. But on the other hand, I think that if we blame it only on automated systems, we will lose also the human factor and the idea that however sophisticated our systems, we cannot ultimately eradicate the human factor. That is why we definitely need to be very cautious about who gets what job, who gets what position, for what reason, and to understand that very frequently lives are at stake. Now, so I want to say that if we engage in a scapegoat attempt, we will lose the bigger picture. Because it is not only this tragedy, there is the question of how to prevent future tragedies. And I want us to move to the next video and show something about what is called the Swiss cheese model of risk management.
The Swiss cheese model. James Reason's Swiss cheese model is a simple metaphor to visualize how patient harm happens based on a systems approach. This metaphor shows us that in a complex healthcare system, errors are prevented by a series of defenses, barriers, and safeguards, represented by slices of cheese. Each slice acts as a defense against things going wrong. Ideally, all slices should remain intact, but each barrier has unintended weaknesses, or holes, which are inconsistent and are constantly opening, shutting, and moving. hence the similarity with Swiss cheese. If an error occurs and breaks through a hole in one slice, it isn't a big problem. It doesn't usually result in a bad outcome. But sometimes the holes line up in multiple slices, meaning all the defense layers have been broken. When all holes are momentarily aligned, it brings hazards into contact with patients and causes them harm. The holes in the defenses arise for two reasons: active failures and latent conditions.
So, this video was a video about the medical system, but it can be used everywhere. Wherever there is risk, this model can be used. And what it says, ultimately, James Reason, who was behind this model, was saying that you cannot change the human conditions. This is the assumption of this model, but you can change the conditions in which humans work. And ultimately, there are no fail-safe systems, and there is always the human factor. The goal is to create these conditions that lower the risk of all hell breaking loose.
It sounds like we're trying to engineer a Laffer curve of the optimum amount of bureaucracy and checks and balances so that it doesn't just go into slowing things down with too much paperwork and malfeasance, but it also doesn't centralize the authority and therefore make it so that there's only one hurdle to clear by an error until all hell breaks loose.
Yes. So the thing is, back to the discussion about the automated systems. What the railway union members say is that although there were some automated systems that were beeping and the railway manager, the rail station manager was unaware of, possibly he wasn't where he should have been, there were some systems there, but there was not a system that would halt trains if they are on collision course within a particular distance.
Right.
So if we just focus on scapegoating, on the government side, we are going to miss this idea that we constantly need to create further conditions that lower the risk of an accident taking place. On the other hand, though, if we focus only on the idea of blaming the government instead of focusing on the human error, we will miss the idea that however sophisticated our mechanisms, we still need qualified people and people who are not of a negligent character, let's say, to operate them. Why? Because at some point they may malfunction. So you cannot not pay attention to the idea that the human factor is, again, pivotal.
Yeah, so speaking from an English example, we haven't had any derailments due to this, but for my line for getting to and from work, southeastern, in and out of London from Kent, they decided to chop and change all the timetables and cut a certain amount of trains in the mornings and evenings, and they thought that this would be totally fine. They didn't have to update any of the systems on their side. What ended up happening is there were bottlenecks at London Bridge and Lewisham because that's where lots of trains flow through, and the signals were out of kilter with how they changed the trains, and so there were massive delays, overpopulated trains, and so one bit of human arrogance caused weeks of disruption to the point where it escalated to Parliament, and Southeastern paid out lots in delay damages. These systems are very complex, and human error will always make itself manifest. You just want to minimize the amount of things that can go wrong that will cause either inconveniences or tragedies like this one.
So we need to focus especially on the dangers of statism and the dangers of statist policies that are directly involved into this. And I will say that, unfortunately, since the 80s, the dominant political paradigm is a form of political clientelism, where we have the exchange of goods, services, and positions for political support. So, in a sense, since the 80s, even though not every party was equally happy with that, they played the game and they were promising, let's say, positions for some people in order for political support. And I will say this, that this is not only in the public sector, because there are all the idea of political support is also in the private sector. Okay, this has to be said.
Yeah, it's just typical nepotism.
Yes. So the thing is that there are problems with statism, particularly when that system of political clientelism expands beyond proportions. Why? Because you create a class of people who have vested interests in not caring about their job the way that they would care if they worked in the private sector.
You get the banality of evil because you have very little
Yes.
accountability for being thrown out of your job if you make an error.
Or to rephrase it, to bring into account my previous point, there is incentive for people to work without thinking that they have political support. That is the problem. If someone thinks that their job is secure because of political clout, then even if that is in the private sector or in the public sector, that's a problem. So this system creates a sizable amount of the population. It's not the majority, but it's a sizable amount that has vested interest in things not changing. These are the direct beneficiaries of that system. But unfortunately, there are indirect beneficiaries of that system. It's the family members, friends, and other people who don't want to see their family members losing their job. So there is a problem that we need to focus and shed light on the idea of how people get jobs, and we need to push forward and stronger an agenda that is a bit more meritocratic and an agenda that is a bit more, let's say, serious that takes seriously the idea that sometimes human lives are at stake. So what I want to say is that what the people should think from now on, what Greek people should think from now on, because there is going to be a future, and the future requires courage. What we need to bear in mind constantly is that in order to destroy that system and weaken it, there will be beneficiaries, direct and indirect beneficiaries, who will scream far right at anyone who tries to disrupt the system, because it's an order, it's a social order. People who are fed from it unjustly have an incentive for that system to stay the same. The point is, changes need to take place faster. And the society needs to bear in mind that these changes cannot happen without many people protesting and saying that their lives are torn away. They're not torn away. Unjust systems require change. And change happen with reforms, and reforms require the bravery to push them forward and enact them. Now, I want to show something big on a slightly positive, because this is not the image of Greece. This is not the entire image of Greece. Okay? And I want to say that there is an Economist article for anyone who is interested about Greece's economic performance lately. And anyone who wants, you can click the link. But I want to read a bit from the next link from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And this is the Economic Survey of Greece 2023. I read: Greece has rebounded well from the COVID-19 crisis, generating strong employment growth, increasing investments and exports, government support measures, implementation of the Greece 2.0 Recovery and Resilience Package, and the reforms of the past decade have been supporting the economy. However, headwinds from surging energy prices and uncertain following Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine have slowed the recovery. Achieving and maintaining primary budget surpluses, better targeting energy support measures, and maintaining public revenues while further broadening the tax base and improving its efficiency will further enhance Greece's prospects of achieving an investment-grade sovereign debt rating. Maintaining the reform momentum, completing the restoration of banks' health, and continuing efforts to improve the business climate can ensure that a sustainable recovery continues over the long term. So what I want to say is that the country has become more extroverted economically and politically. And in that respect, the country is moving forward. But it is not enough to bring forth the kind of change we want to see. And we shouldn't say, and the point is, in a sense, to take the lesson of the Greek crisis of the 2010 that has lasted. So when there is a wound that is bleeding, you do what you have to heal the wound. Instead of doing that, there is a feeling among the population that we have just got accustomed into bleeding without dying. And this is because at the moment we lost some opportunities to implement the policies that were required to let's say, destroy that clientelist system or significantly diminish its power. And I want to say that political elections are coming. I mean, elections are political, but elections are coming. And for the first time, Greeks that do not stay in Greece will be able to vote. And this is something that the current government has pushed forward. And that is a step to the right direction. So I believe that this government will win this election. But the new mandate, if it wins, the new mandate will be to push even forward and push harder for these reforms that have to be made. Instead of just making a micromanagement and making some small steps and just saying, okay, we made some small steps, so let us keep the other people happy because we don't want the political cost.
That seems the only just way to get recompense for all the people that died.
Yes. So I think that it is a way of mourning is due, but to honor the memories of those victims, we need to learn from what happened to them, and we need to reflect upon the kind of system that creates opportunities for disasters and makes disasters more and tragedies more likely. And when we reflect on this, because there is diagnosis is not enough, we need to act accordingly and push forward the policies that must be pushed forward.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this episode on the limitations of science. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.